Hi, Christina. Thank you for being here today.
Hi, Michelle. Thanks for having me.
Can you tell me a little bit about yourself?
Absolutely. Hi, everyone. I'm Christina Furnival. I'm a mom and I live in San Diego with my husband from Scotland and our two kiddos. I have a 5-year-old daughter and a 3-year-old son. And I am also a licensed professional clinical counselor, which means I am a therapist. And most recently, I am a children's book author. And in my spare time, which is very few, I love to craft and DIY. I actually have a little bit of paint on my hands still from painting the kitchen this morning, and love to play soccer and exercise and have wild dance parties in our living room.
Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing all of that. Tell me a little bit about what made you become a therapist.
Well, I knew always that I wanted to be in a helping profession, but I thought I wanted to be a pediatric doctor. And I went to Vanderbilt University for my undergraduate schooling, and I studied Spanish literature and child development, and I was pre-med at the time. So I took all the pre-med courses. And two things happened. One of them was that I was not interested in the pre-med material. And the second was that I was awful at the pre-med material. And so I knew I had to kind of pivot and come up with a new plan. And my mom actually is a licensed marriage and family therapist. And growing up, it was so helpful. She taught me all about emotions from a very young age. But I always considered that career her thing, and I was going to find my thing. But when I needed to do this pivot and I did some self-study and thought about what I'm really interested in and what I'm good at and where that converges, I realized that actually I'm a lot like my mom, and that being a therapist, I think, is something that I would really enjoy. So I went and got my master's in professional counseling, and then I moved back to California and got licensed here in California. And so I've been in the field now since 2009, and I've worked in outpatient clinics and hospital programs. I've also worked for a nonprofit, actually, where I met Michelle. And I was just thinking last night, I think it's been 10 years maybe since we met,
I think
2012.
so, yeah.
And so I worked for a nonprofit where I met Michelle, and I taught parenting education classes, and I provided one-on-one behavioral support. And then when I became a mom, I kind of shifted again. And so I write a motherhood blog, a therapeutic motherhood blog called Real Life Mama. And then that writing adventure has kind of turned its way into writing children's books as well. So I get to be a stay-at-home mom. I get to provide therapy in the evening via telehealth. Now I work with adults, and I get to write my children's books.
And what are your children's books about?
Well, funny you should ask. I have both them right here. Well, I have one right here. I've got proof of the other one right here. My first book is The Not So Friendly Friend: How to Set Boundaries for Healthy Friendships. And this is a book that I wrote for my daughter, actually. So when she was 3 and in preschool, she came home from school and was talking about a friend who wasn't being very nice to her. And I actually had witnessed this at drop off. Sometimes this friend was really lovely and would just fawn over my daughter. And then sometimes she was actually very rejecting. And my daughter felt very confused and unsure of how to handle it. Since I've always worked with kids, I went to my bookcase that has a whole bunch of social emotional books and looked through my friendship section, but I couldn't find a book that spoke to standing up for yourself and setting boundaries with friends. And so I wrote it, and my daughter loved it. It was very helpful. And it also started really good conversations between she and me. And then I decided to have it professionally edited and sent it off to publishers. And that's how it actually became a book. I got a book deal, and we've got this one. And this is all part of the Capable Kiddos series. You can see right there.
And I'll include the links below.
Yes, thank you. And then book 2 is about to come out, and I just have this big old proof, which is basically they printed it, but it's not bound.
Yeah.
And it's called, let's get the sign off. It's called Fear Not: How to Face Your Fear and Anxiety Head On. And I love this little guy. He's so brave. And this has 3 simple kind of steps to working through and living with and managing anxiety. And it's a really great book. Both of them are rhyming picture books. So they're geared for kids probably 4 to 11 years old or so. But in particular, because The Not So Friendly Friend is already out, the feedback that I've gotten has been from older children and adults as well, saying, wow, this was really important. I didn't realize I needed to implement more boundaries, or I didn't even realize what boundaries were. Why didn't I know this before my 30s and 40s? So I think even though they are books geared for younger children, they're helpful for anybody.
Yeah, I have your first book because obviously the second one isn't out for purchasing yet, but my son, who's not quite 4 yet, loves that book as well. And he's learned a lot from it. And he comes home and says, "Oh, I," mentions the book and how he used it in school that day. And I've even read the book to some of my adult clients and they love it as well. And
Oh,
they
I love
definitely
that.
relate to it. So definitely all ages seem to be benefiting from that book.
Yeah, thank you. Well, and what's been really cool is what you were just saying is it's starting conversations that maybe wouldn't have happened otherwise. And I've had some friends or family or even people message me online, people that I don't know, saying, we read this once and my child said, oh, that reminds me of so and so at
Mhm.
school. The parent didn't even know that there was a problem happening. And then this got that dialogue started. So it's been
Yeah.
a pretty cool experience seeing the book take on a life of its own.
Definitely, and being able to label what's happening and to have the proper language to express what's going on is so important. And I'm
Yes.
wondering, how do boundaries impact the therapeutic relationship?
So boundaries, I think in general are our personal superpower. Boundaries enable you to be your true and authentic self and voice what you're thinking, feeling, what you want, what you value, what you don't want. And in the therapeutic relationship, that's really important too. So if you're a therapist or if you're a client and you're watching this, each of you should have boundaries.
Mhm.
As the client, your therapist is likely going to ask you questions that push you a little bit, that make you think hard about things that maybe you've been avoiding or things that maybe you didn't realize were bothering you. And sometimes that can be too much at once. And
Mhm.
as a client, you absolutely have the right to say, you know what, you hit the nail on the head, and I'm sure we need to go there, but I'm just not ready yet. That's absolutely okay to do. And your
Mhm.
therapist will either be like, well, okay, I'm going to meet you where you're at. Let's go somewhere else with this conversation. Or they'll help you process why
Mhm.
you're not wanting to go there yet without going there, because they'll respect your boundary. There's also, Michelle and I have talked about this before, when you get licensed as a therapist, you're given a book called Sex is Not in Therapy. I think, is that what it's called? And I
Yes.
remember the first time I got it, I'm like, what the heck? And we've talked about it. We're like, why is this so important to bring up? Are people doing this? And I mean, it must be. So if you're a client, your therapist should not try and have sex with you. And you should not try and have sex with your therapist. That is
Mhm.
not in therapy. It's not part of it.
That's a
Your relation,
boundary.
it's a boundary. It's a firm, that is like a hardcore firm boundary. That is a non-flexible boundary. And I think with that relationship, ideally what you're looking for, at least what I look for when I'm looking for a therapist or what I'm looking to offer my clients, is a comfortable, relatable, but professional relationship. I am here to serve you, and I may have anecdotal stories or I may have a relatable thing to share with you so that you feel not alone in your experiences, but it's not about me. It's not about my stuff. It's about you, and I'm there to serve you. So that's another way that boundaries can come in, is if your therapist is turning the sessions into their talk hour, that's not okay and that's not right. They should be dedicating their time towards you and helping you solve your problems. As well, you should not feel judged by your therapist. Um, Obviously, we're all people and we all have our own value systems, but a therapist's job is to provide you unconditional positive regard. And that means that they are there for you, they're on your side, they're your cheerleader. They also are looking within your framework of right, wrong, good, bad, ideal, not good, to help you find what works for you. It's not about the therapist goals or what the therapist thinks you
Mm.
should do. It's about what works in your own framework. So, do you have any other boundaries, Michelle, that I didn't mention or good ideas related to that?
Well, I'd like you to speak a little bit more. You mentioned a firm boundary.
Mm,
So, are there different types of boundaries, or can you speak to the different types of boundaries?
yes. So, there are different boundary strengths and there are different types of boundaries. If you grew up being a people pleaser, me, you might have very loose, porous boundaries. You like to make people happy. You give a lot of yourself because it feels good, but also maybe then they'll like you more. And so, what you often find when you're a person that has kind of way too open boundaries is that people overstep. And you often then feel resentful.
Mm.
But there's this conflict because you haven't actually voiced what's bothering you or what you wouldn't like or what wouldn't be okay with you. You just kind of act like it's all okay, until oftentimes then we explode. And so people like us might feel like setting boundaries is mean, but in reality, it's actually the most loving thing you can do for yourself and for your relationship because it's honest.
Mm.
And then it allows you to not blow up later because your partner, your friend, your boss, whomever already knows what works with you and doesn't work with you. So those too porous of boundaries is no bueno. The other side of the spectrum is if you have too rigid of boundaries. And you can imagine like a chain link fence with barbed wire all around it. Keep out, right? So sometimes people have been through a lot of trauma in their life, or they've developed this inner dialogue that I can't trust people. People don't love me. People can't take care of me. And then they put up this wall. You've heard of people saying they're guarded or they have a wall up. And that's the idea of these rigid boundaries where you might keep out those bad people, but you also keep out the good people. And that's not good either. So I think either side of the spectrum is not healthy. You want to find you're somewhere in the middle, and it's not always dead center. And it's probably specific to the context and the person as well. Where it's more of a firm boundary, you have control over your situations, but you also have the flexibility. So I like to picture like instead of the fence with barbed wire, and instead of no fence, like a little white picket fence with a gate. That's what I like to think of as boundaries. So this is my property. These are my feelings. These are my thoughts and beliefs. And I'll let in the people that treat me with love, treat me with care, that respect me. So that's kind of the goal with boundary strength. And then the types of boundaries are anything. They could be physical. So right now in pandemic life, you want a certain amount of space between you and the person that you're speaking with to feel comfortable. That's a physical boundary. You might step back if they're getting too close. You might vocalize to them, hey, do you mind if we step back a little bit? There are boundaries around physicality, again, with touch. So maybe you like hugs, maybe you don't like hugs, and you let people know. We don't just assume that they know. There are boundaries around time. And this is a big one. A lot of us give a lot of our time to people, and then we're like, oh, I don't want to see that person, or I'm so exhausted from talking to that friend. They always just let it all out on me, and then I like have to deal with it. So we're allowed to say, let's say you have a friend that calls, and every time you see their name on the phone, you're like, am I ready to answer this? I don't know. That with that friend, you could set a boundary of, hey, I'm not going to be answering your calls, but I'll call you when I'm in a place where I'm ready to talk, because I want to be able to give you my best self on our phone calls. And when you call me, sometimes I'm in the middle of stuff and I feel pressured to answer. So this way it just works out better. Does that work for you too? Sort of thing. So you can set time boundaries. You can set boundaries in your romantic relationships over what you're okay with sexually or not. You can set boundaries over your spiritual beliefs, boundaries over your intellectual thoughts, boundaries around your feelings. You have a right to think and feel and believe whatever you want without anyone else judging you or making you feel bad about it. So they're like boundaries in all sorts of situations, all sorts of contexts, and then variable strengths depending on what you need to do.
So would someone go to therapy to find out what are their boundaries or what is comfortable for them?
Certainly. Yeah. I think boundaries come up in probably all of my sessions. I'm obviously on a boundaries kick with my book and the research that I've done on it, but it is relevant to everybody's life. A lot of the conflicts that we encounter are because of something we haven't said or something we hoped our husband of 15 years would just know, and those sorts of things. And the more clear and explicit we can be and expect that from our friends, partners, and other relationships as well, I think the better off we are. So absolutely that can be spoken about in therapy and help you figure out what is your, so I do CBT generally and client focused therapy, and CBT is cognitive behavioral therapy. And the name kind of gives it away. So cognitive are thoughts, behaviors are actions. So the idea is how your thoughts impact how you feel and how that impacts what you do, what your actions are. And it's this circle and they're all interwoven. So if you're having problems with boundaries, whether they're too firm or they're too loose, why is that? What thoughts are you telling yourself? How is that impacting how you feel about yourself? What are you thinking is going to happen? And so we do a lot of Socratic questioning where we kind of take you down this path and help you figure out what's the evidence to prove that or disprove that. Is that a likely scenario or not? And really help you gain better understanding of yourself and the way that you think and process things so that you can be more intentional in your own experience.
And how does someone find a therapist?
There are several ways. They're not great, to be honest.
So you find it you believe it's challenging to find a therapist.
I do.
Yeah,
I
it is
think
hard.
yeah, it's not easy. There are, there's online sources. So psychologytoday.com, a lot
Mhm.
of therapists put profiles on there. And so you can search for the specialty based on what your issues are, their gender, what they're open to. There are very all-inclusive therapists and people to make you feel comfortable. But what I've heard from clients is oftentimes they'll reach out to several therapists and not get calls
Mhm.
back. Or you can call the number on your insurance card, and then that way they can tell you who's in network for you.
Mhm.
You can also do a Google search of therapists in your area. You could use, Michelle and I were just talking about hashtags on social media. You can even use hashtags. You do, hashtag San Diego therapist, because I'm in San Diego, or, California therapist, and you might be able to find some accounts and follow them and go to their websites and use their contact forms. So there are a lot of ways, but I feel like what's hard is you want to know that it's going to work or that you're going to click with that therapist, and there's no guarantee until you're in the session
Yeah.
whether or not you find out, oh, I like this person or I don't. So some people do, quote, shop around. I've never done that for my own therapy,
Mhm.
um, because that sounds like a lot of work.
It is. It is.
It sounds like too much to do. So what I've also tried to do is like ask my own personal doctor,
Mhm.
any of my friends, if they have people that they get along well with, or if their therapist has any recommendations for someone who's similar.
Mhm.
Trying to use your network can be
Yeah.
helpful, because you do want your therapist and you to get along. Like the number one way to get support and see progress is knowing that there's a strong therapeutic rapport, which means the therapy relationship is good,
Mhm.
regardless of the therapeutic approach. So you really, really do want it to have a good relationship with your therapist. So my
Yeah.
recommendation would be, if you don't feel like you have the time to therapist shop, which I don't either, is to find one, hope for the best, and go. And then
Mhm.
if it doesn't work, then you can look again. So instead of looking for several on the outset, give one a try and
Mhm.
then change if you need to. And that's totally okay. Because if you're not feeling it, they're probably not feeling it. It probably is just
Yeah.
a mismatch.
Yeah. Do people always feel better after leaving a therapy session?
No.
No. Tell
Um,
me a little bit about that.
I mean, ideally, that'd be great. But the
Mhm.
reality is, if you're doing good therapy and if you're really allowing yourself as a client to start to do some work, you might leave feeling a bit confused, or you might leave feeling a little bit heavier sometimes. And that's because you're breaking free of old
Mm.
habits and old thought patterns, and change is hard. But that said, therapy also isn't crying all the time
Yeah.
and boohoo, woe is me, and depressing all the time.
Mhm.
I took photos for my website that we had redone last year, and the web designer was like, Christina, you're like really smiley in all these photos. And I'm like, well, first of all, I have a giant smile. So like I kind of just can't help that. But second of all, I'm laughing through so
Mhm.
many of my sessions. Like
Yeah.
ideally you have such a good relationship, client and therapist, that it's an enjoyable time,
Mhm.
even when you start to get
Mhm.
deeper into more personal or in-depth or ingrained issues. So you may leave therapy feeling great. You may leave therapy feeling worn out. There's a lot of different ways that you might leave
Yeah,
therapy.
or even possibly feeling more than one emotion at a time.
Yeah. Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So it sounds like a difference between a therapist and a friend is in a therapy relationship, you're going to be breaking through, I think is the word that you used, some stuff that you've been holding in. Can you share a little bit more about that?
Yeah. So there are a lot of people that have made comments, and I've said them before too, of like, well, I don't really need a therapist because I talk to my mom,
Hmm.
or I talk to my sister, I talk to my friend, I talk to
Hmm.
whomever. And that's great. If you have social supports that you can connect to and that feels good, fabulous. The benefit of a therapist is that they are an objective outsider. They have no interest. And I mean that in the way of like pull. They
Hmm.
don't need an outcome to be a certain way. Whereas with
Hmm.
your friend or family member, you're going to want X, Y, or
Hmm.
Z outcome for you.
Hmm.
So the therapist is totally objective, no bias, as well as clinically trained and
Hmm.
experienced, has insight, knowledge, and skills that your friends or family are not going to have. And even if your friend or family member is a therapist, they're probably not going to use those skills on you either, because that's not very ethical.
Mhm.
And it's not in the therapeutic setting. Also, in a friendship, it's very two-way street. You tell about your woes, you tell about your successes, and then your friend relates. And in therapy, you do want there to be a bit of relatability. Like I said, the therapist might use an anecdote
Mhm.
here or there, but it's not about the therapist and it's not about this kind of two-way street. It's more one-sided because you're paying for the services. Like it
Yeah.
absolutely should be focused on you. So
Mhm.
you're getting objectivity, you're getting professionalism, and you're getting knowledge and know-how that you wouldn't get from friends and family.
Great. Anything else that you're wanting to share today?
Oh, that's a good question. I think, in the times of the pandemic, we all could probably use therapy. And I think more and more people are reaching out for it, which is great. I know my schedule is full. I think Michelle, you're super
Mhm.
full. So in that way, if you're looking for therapists and you are finding that people are full, keep trying. If you need it, you can get it. Just keep plugging away. Ask the therapist that's busy if they know
Mhm.
anyone, kind of branch out in that way. Don't get discouraged. There are also so many more options now than previously because virtual has become such
Mhm.
mainstream approach to therapy these days. That's all I'm doing is telehealth.
Yeah.
And because of that, I can see clients in the evening,
Mhm.
which previously, if you saw a therapist, you'd go to their office, you'd maybe drive half an hour each way. It would be during your working hours. And so you can kind of make it work for you now. There's so many online platforms. I work for MD Live, but I know there's many, many others. And a lot of people in private practice are also doing telehealth now as well. So if you want or need the support, or you're just curious, or you are going through a change and you feel like you don't know how to handle it, like you don't have to be clinically depressed or clinically anxious
Mhm.
or have bipolar disorder. You can just want some support, and you can be a mom with mom rage, which me too. Like we're all human and we all can use a hand here and there. So um,
Great.
yeah,
Well, thank you for being here today and for sharing with us your expertise.
thank you for having me.